A reading from the Gospel of John, chapter 20, verses 1 through 18. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Then Peter and the other disciple set out and went toward the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent down to look in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the cloth that had been on Jesus' head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and believed, for as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to their homes. Now Mary stood outside the tomb crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they have put him." At this she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that he had said these things to her. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
I want to begin my sermon this morning with an exercise testing the vastness of your imagination. Just for a moment, I want you to now close your eyes and imagine an early morning on a day much like this. You're surrounded and in a beautiful garden. Take a moment now just to take in the sights and the sounds. What do you see? What do you feel as you're in this garden? Can you sense the trees, the flowers? Is there water flowing? Maybe the air has a bit of a chill in it as the sun begins to rise. It's springtime. Flowers and new life start to arise from the ground. All is quiet and peaceful. You begin to hear the birds sing as they awaken to a new day. All is calm as you feel the beauty and harmony of creation around you. Take a moment just to enjoy being in this garden. Now I want you to slowly open your eyes and come back to being present here. In a garden, early in the morning on a day much like this, we encounter a young woman at Jesus' tomb. John reveals that it's Mary Magdalene, Jesus' faithful follower and friend. Arriving at the tomb in the darkness of night, Mary sees that the tombstone has been rolled away. Assuming that Jesus' body has been stolen, and worrying that she's still standing among the grave robbers, Mary runs to tell Peter and John what's happened. Everyone rushes back to the tomb to see what's going on. John arrives first to see a few linens scattered about outside the tomb. Peter then enters the tomb and John follows, but Mary remains outside. The tomb is empty. Jesus is nowhere to be found. A few burial garments are all that remain. The disciples return home quickly. But why? Perhaps Peter and John are in shock, in a state of shock as the scene is just too much for them to handle, as they realize that even in death, Jesus has no peace from the hostilities of the world. Or maybe, just maybe, they're plain scared, sensing that Jesus' body was stolen by the political and religious opponents who had him crucified and who are now looking for them. Either way, John's gospel makes clear that the disciples aren't sticking around and rush home quickly. Yet what's interesting to me is not the disciples' reaction that morning, but Mary's. Standing at the entrance of the tomb, Mary is greatly troubled by the foul play. She's struck with grief and is weeping. Mary is frozen in place. Unlike Peter and John, she can neither move forward to enter the tomb nor turn back. Unable to move forward, Mary cannot accept that all her hopes over the last few years, hope for a better life, hope for a more just and loving world, hope in Jesus, now like that tomb, just feel empty and hollow. Yet Mary is also unable to turn back, unable to return home to her previous life. She cannot ignore all that she's seen, all that she's heard, and most deeply, all that she's desired for in the Messiah. Mary is stuck at a crossroads. Rather than stumble her way forward or fumble her way back, Mary does what's often hardest for us to do. She simply takes time to breathe, to be present, and to feel her feelings. As she feels all that's happening that morning, Mary becomes ever more aware that she's standing at a great crossroads. A crossroads not just in her life, but in the life of the world. Mary stands at a place of great spiritual convergence, a place where heaven and earth are about to meet, a place where life is about to emerge from the earth. Standing at the entry of the tomb, Mary can sense on a soul level that she is literally standing at a crossroads between life and death, faith and fear, hope and despair. Weeping and totally overwhelmed, Mary peers into the tomb to see two angels sitting where Jesus had been laid. Now you'd think that the sudden appearance of two heavenly beings completely out of nowhere would either freak Mary out or make her think a little bit more than just about where Jesus' body has gone. But Mary remains singularly focused on that issue. Things get even more strange when a man suddenly appears out of nowhere behind Mary and asks her why she's weeping. Instead of recognizing Jesus, Mary thinks that he is the gardener. So what do we make of this whole phenomenon of Mary thinking that Jesus is the gardener? On the one hand, we can just chalk all of this up to a simple mistake. A simple mistake that Mary has made since John says that Jesus' tomb was in a garden. So, of course, naturally, gardeners may be in the area. On the other hand, Mary's whole focus that morning is on seeing Jesus. Yet when Mary literally comes face to face with Jesus, she thinks that he's a gardener. It's a strange and odd scene, isn't it? one that makes clear that John's gospel is trying to make a deeper point about Jesus' true identity. As it turns out, in John's gospel, perhaps more than any other, Jesus teaches with images from gardening. For example, in John 12, Jesus says, and I quote, "Unless a grain of wheat falls to the floor and dies, it remains just a grain." It's a powerful resurrection image that Jesus uses to describe that the old must fall away and die for transformation and new life to occur. In John 15, Jesus says, and I quote, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower," to describe that a fruitful life is one that is rooted in God, who is like a gardener, constantly tending to our souls and pruning those parts of us that don't lead to growth. Yet as Mary identifies Christ as a gardener, John's gospel is making an even deeper point, one that harkens us back to the beginning, back to the Garden of Eden, a time where we were one with the Creator, where God walked among us, and where all was in balance. Like a gardener who tends to the soul of the world, John reminds us that Jesus is the one who has come to restore humanity back to this original harmony of oneness with creation and with the Creator. Contrary to the tomb of death of Jesus, the garden is a place of great life. Unlike the wildness of wilderness, a garden is a place where God and humanity work together, co-creating, bringing about order, and enhancing the natural beauty of creation. Echoing the book of Genesis, John starts his gospel with the words, "In the beginning," making it clear that John is telling us a new creation story. And like in Genesis, here new life for humanity again arises from the earth, but this time from a tomb. On Ash Wednesday, we began our Easter journey when I placed ashes on your foreheads in the shape of a cross, and I uttered the sacred words, "From dust you have arisen, to dust you shall return." This morning, though, we must ask ourselves, what does it really mean to be made of dust? On Ash Wednesday every year, we are reminded of the mysterious reality that each of our lives are drawn from the dust of the earth, that we are all made from the dust of stars that exploded billions of years ago. Each atom within us carries a part of the cosmos. Each of our cells, our very DNA, hold billions of years of memories, wisdom, and lives lived long ago. As we approach Earth Day next week, we recall that we are forged from the earth and forever remain interconnected to the land, the water, the wildlife, and all that has gone on before us. We are one with the Creator who took up dust, breathed into it, and gave us the sacredness of life. So when Mary identifies Jesus as the gardener, John calls us to remember this greater cosmic mystery, a mystery where God continues to shape humanity not just from the earth and cosmic dust, but where God the gardener shapes our souls and tends to our daily lives. Like Mary, who was distraught with grief and overwhelmed that morning, in Jesus the gardener, we encounter a God who meets us where we are, a God who's not afraid of the hurt, the messiness, and the dirt in our own lives, a God who's earthy and intimate, a God who calls each one of us by name. Now, 2 weeks ago, Harry and I both preached on this exact biblical text as part of Easter. As preachers, it's easy for us to want to stop at this nice, serene image, leaving you all in a beautiful garden, enjoying the company of the resurrected Jesus. Indeed, it's the perfect place to not only end a sermon, but to end the Gospel of John. Matter of fact, this is exactly what's on Mary's mind that morning, as she goes from the whirlwind of emotions at the tomb to wanting nothing more than to stay in the comforts of the garden with her friend Jesus. But the fact is, the story doesn't end there. Rather, Jesus actively pushes Mary and us out of the garden, refusing to allow us to be content basking in the presence of the risen Christ. As Mary seeks to greet Jesus with a warm embrace and hug that morning, in John 20:17, Jesus says to Mary, and I quote, "Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father." Although Jesus' words may seem harsh, especially given all that Mary has been through that morning, when Jesus tells Mary, "Do not hold on to me," what he's really saying to her is, I can see that you want things to stay the way they are. I can see that you want things to stay the way they've always been, to freeze this moment in time and hold on to the way things are. But that's not how things are going to work post-resurrection. Any of us who have children know it often feels like they're growing up way too fast. It's easy for us to yearn for those sweet moments of the past or want to hold on to the present moments just as they are. Indeed, this is what Mary is trying to do as she recalls those past moments her and Jesus shared together and wants nothing more than to hold on to those feelings and those moments in the garden. Jesus, the divine gardener, knows our struggles to want to hold on to the way things were or the way things are. But there's no holding on in a garden. In a garden, things are always changing, growing, and evolving. Anyone who's ever gardened knows that nothing is static. Things are in constant transition. The old must fall away for new life to occur. Like in life, in a garden, there's always lots of going on above and below the surface. We're constantly being surrounded by hidden and new possibilities. Any of us who are gardeners also know that gardening takes a lot of work. So rather than allow Mary to be a passive spectator basking in the garden, Jesus calls Mary to join in God's co-creation by giving Mary the incredibly important task of being the first apostle to the apostles. Jesus tells Mary to run back to the disciples and testify to them. Testify to them that where they thought there was death, there's life. Something new and amazing is happening here. We just didn't have the capacity to see or understand it. Jesus calls Mary to proclaim to the world that this is a God who doesn't give up, who remains undeterred in the face of impossibility. All the things that you think you know about God, the things that you thought you can hold on to, are changing and different this Easter morning. For God has conquered death. God doesn't play by our rules. If you're too busy holding on to the way things were, holding on to your grief and to your fears, then how are you ever going to be open to the new possibilities, to the growth, and to all the amazing things that God has in store for you? A powerful and important message Mary has to deliver to the world. In giving Mary this awesome responsibility, Jesus reminds the church that although we love to bask in the resurrection of Easter, we have work to do. For we are called to be co-laborers in God's garden. Our world is not static. The transformative work of faith, hope, love, and justice must be done. When Jesus tells Mary that he must ascend to God, Jesus isn't abandoning us, but rather shows an unshakable faith and confidence that us followers will continue to do God's great work here on earth. Jesus knows that he must go away for his disciples to do even greater things. Like a loving parent who wants their children to grow up and mature, Jesus has given us his teachings and knows that now is the time for us to live into our God-given gifts, to put these teachings into action and work in our world. So, my sisters and brothers, the Easter trumpets have played, the lilies have bloomed, and the Alleluias have been sung. Where does that leave us then on this post-Easter morning? Like Mary, standing at the tomb, we must recognize that we too stand at a great crossroads. A crossroads where we must choose to either accept a world that has normalized violence, death, and despair, or live lives that actively pronounce to the world that life is greater than death, hope is greater than despair, faith is greater than fear, and love is greater than hate. This morning, we stand at a great spiritual crossroads where we must choose to either ignore God's presence in our daily lives, always rushing ahead, or constantly looking back, or like Mary, take time to slow down, to feel our feelings, and to realize that God is even closer to us than our own souls. As we gaze out upon our nation this morning, we must confess that Christianity in America is at a great moral and theological crossroads, a crossroads where we can no longer accept a religious and political culture that uses the cross as a tool of shame, hatred, violence, and nationalism, but must instead embrace the cross for what it truly is, the most powerful symbol of God's love, redemption, justice, reconciliation, hope, and new life. Forged from the earth and marching towards this year's Earth Day, as Earth people, we stand at a great ecological crossroads where we must choose to either keep going down a path of wastefulness, environmental destruction, and climate chaos where we're always holding on to the way things were and don't want to change, or we actively change our ways to be more responsible stewards of God's creation and to stand in solidarity with the divine gardener who seeks to restore our original harmony with creation and the Creator. While standing at such crossroads is not easy, my sisters and brothers, let us have faith that the God of miracles stands among us, that the risen Christ meets us where we are, that the divine gardener calls each of us by name, tends to our souls, and asks each of us to join in co-creating a world where all of God's children and all of God's creatures can grow and truly flourish. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. Now it's time to get to work. Amen.